Terrence Hunter, and I'm the Mississippi Delta Fellow with Delta Directions Consortium. Delta Directions is an interdisciplinary network of partners, individuals, academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, and the such, and they work on issues in the Delta to help promote positive change. And my role as a Delta Fellow is to act as a bridge between those institutions and those partners with the local organizations like themselves in the Delta. So hopefully with this, with me being the moderator for this summit, this will be a perfect opportunity for you to get to know me and some of the rest of the partners you'll hear from later on. Just a little background about myself. I'm a 2017 graduate of Tougaloo College, May 2020 graduate of the University of Mississippi, and I'm looking forward to being the Delta Fellow during this tenure. Today you will hear from two people, Tom and Keith. They're spearheading the Feed Fund at the Community Foundation. You'll also hear from Anna Kleiner. She'll talk about some of the Feed Fund interviews that were conducted over the past few months, and we'll learn a few things on how to better serve the Mississippi Delta in the time of this pandemic. So we want to go into the introduction into the Feed Fund. First, I want to introduce Keith Fulcher. He's the president and CEO of the Community Foundation. He just joined the Community Foundation recently in 2019 after spending 23 years with the state working with their alumni foundation and securing major gifts for the university. If you haven't met Keith yet, he has a high motor, and when he set out to do something, he gets it done. And it's great that the Community Foundation has someone like him. Also, we have Tom Pittman, who was the first president and CEO of the Community Foundation. He oversees the growth and production of the Community Foundation. So he's here as well, and just getting to know him over my brief time as the Delta Fellow. He has the same motor. He's just a bit calmer than Keith, but they both have the same drive to get things done with the Community Foundation. Before we go into the actual presentation on what the Community Foundation is and the Feed Fund and how it works, I just want to give you all an update on something that recently happened with the Department of Agriculture in our country. They recently decided that school kids would have access to, the school districts would provide free breakfast and lunch to any child or teenager through the end of 2020, providing that funding lasts. Now, this was a turn from what they previously said in the past, is that they will only provide food for students in their district, and people and students that didn't qualify for these meals would have to pay for them. So this is something significant. We want to just highlight that, and just to let everyone know that some things are working for the betterment of the students in the country. So without further ado, we want to go ahead and get into the presentations. I will turn it over to Keith and Tom.
Thank you, Terrence. Keith Fulcher, Community Foundation of Northwest Mississippi. Real honored to be here. I hope I'm coming through clear. This is only the second time I've presented on a webinar, and I'm very, very honored. So when I was reading about the San Antonio Food Bank, and I'm gonna steal a quote from their president to help kick us off. Their president of the San Antonio Food Bank said, "Where others have retreated, we are able to connect on a deeper level with food." And so I think that's the theme of what we've tried to do at the Community Foundation is connect with people. And the way we're connecting with especially children is through food and taking care of their nutrition. And this comes from a long legacy of the Community Foundation being involved in this area. So I'm gonna ask Tom Pittman, who was the first president of and only president of the Community Foundation, to give us a little history of how the Community Foundation of Northwest Mississippi has been involved in the area of nutrition. Tom?
Yeah, thanks, Keith, and thank you to everybody who's joining us. Some of you may know this story, but I wanted to just to let you know with the Community Foundation how it came to be involved with the Feed Fund. The mission statement is simply to connect people who care with causes that matter. And in 2004, when I first started with the Community Foundation, the foundation developed a priority of reducing childhood obesity. And we quickly determined that there are two components, physical activity and nutrition. And we focused a lot on nutrition. And we were looking then as food as medicine, something that would make someone healthier. Because as you know, the obesity leads to all sorts of chronic diseases, diabetes and cancers and heart disease. So we were interested in and worked very hard on that. And one of the big lessons was we developed a regional health council with representatives from all 11 counties. And what we determined was we were better together. People knew, had different resources, had different bits of knowledge. And so we could work on these food issues together, and it made everybody stronger. We were sailing along, and then the Great Recession came in 2008, 2009. And for the first time, we began to think about hunger and food insecurity, that because we began to get lots of requests for grants. And so we really turned our attention to making grants for food relief, and then just seeing it, kind of the Maslow hierarchy of needs. If you don't have food, it's hard to do much of anything else. So we got into that pretty strongly. And since that time, since 2011, have focused a lot on first foods, breastfeeding, which is nutritious and affordable. So we've been focused a lot on that kind of food issue. And in 2017, we hosted a hunger summit just for DeSoto County to really come in the food insecurity issue. And we had some really nice partnerships come out of that as well. One small nonprofit in DeSoto County wound up partnering with the American Cancer Society for a demonstration project that combines all sorts of things like gleaning and hydroponics, so that we learned that people, again, getting together can address these issues around food. And then when the pandemic hit, I think we were ready. When the pandemic hit, and particularly when the schools were closed, we realized that about 80% of the children were getting their lunch and breakfast free at public schools. And with that closed, not only were they not able to get the food there, but with the accompanying economic problems, it was going to be difficult for their families to provide for this additional food. So that's when we launched the Feed Fund. And that was also about the time I stepped down as president, and Keith stepped in and has just done a fabulous job, not only getting out and seeing what's going on in the area of food, but also connecting with donors and raising almost $500,000 since that time to provide food for children and their families in the Delta. So thank Keith, and he can tell you much more about it than I can. Keith, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And it is an honor and a privilege to be carrying on the tradition and the legacy of feeding children. I mean, you gave me some new information about, the early age of breastfeeding children. And so, everyone listening, I see we have 83 participants. So everyone listening, just know that the Community Foundation for the last 20 years has been involved in this. We're not newcomers, but there's always something new to learn. And this is definitely a new situation to all of us. And as Tom said, he semi-retired April 1, and he kept telling me, I was going to take over on April Fool's Day. I said, Tom, don't say that. Something bad's going to happen. Sure enough, the pandemic hit. But that pandemic has given us an opportunity to better fulfill our mission of connecting people who care with causes that matter. And there is nothing more important that we found that people want to take care of than children, no matter at what age. So after 23 years of raising money for Delta State University, after 11 years of raising money through the Catholic Church and school, I just feel like I've stepped into just the perfect job with the perfect mission. And so as Tom pointed out, if you can see this number, $449,844. That's what's been donated since middle of March for feeding. So at first we started out providing grants in the $1,000 to $2,000 range directly to food pantries to purchase food. Because as Tom mentioned, we had heard that schools, children were not receiving food through the lunch and breakfast program. When food became free through the USDA, we got into purchasing freezers and refrigerators and anything types of equipment, pallet jacks, anything that would help these food pantries become state of the art. That's been our theme at the Community Foundation. And I know about half of the participants, I looked at the list and highlighted, over half of the participants of today, you received a grant from the Community Foundation. And so we're honored, and it's a privilege to grant to you because you're doing the hard work. I mean, you cannot, if I've been, and our staff has been to almost every one of these food pantries. These are volunteers who are not making big bucks. They're doing it from the grassroots, getting food to the children and households who need it the most. So thank you. And I wish, we could double that. And we do have a chance to double that. And we'll talk about the CARES Act. So that's what we've been doing with the Feed Fund, is using those resources, partially thanks to the Maddox Foundation for matching grants and to the Walton Family Foundation for matching our donor grants to help the food pantries become state of the art. And along the way, we've tried to educate ourselves on the major food providers, the USDA, Terrence, thank you for mentioning the USDA, and how we can best serve the grassroots food pantry. So Tom, is that anything else that I missed about the Feed Fund? I think most people on the call have experienced it in one way or another, but anything I've missed, please fill in.
I think that says it very well. I think Terrence, you said that I'm a bit calm or don't have my motor running quite as hard as Keith. That's been very evident during this time period, but he's covered the Delta very, very well and showed videos and all sorts of things. If you missed any of those, you're in for a treat. But it really shows. I think that's just really important that, I had a call from a guy who just told me, so when you see somebody making sandwiches in Shaw, you know that you're really getting out into the Delta, and Keith has gotten into the Delta, and we have appreciated that.
Well, thank you for reminding me. One last thing, Terrence. I'm going to share my screen, so I hope everybody can see. This is our Community Foundation's YouTube channel. So I hope everyone can see that. If you can, put something in the chat box, especially if I know Zenobio's on here. I know Delta Hands for Hope is, but this, you can just see the collection of videos of where we've been, Odessa Food Pantry in Tunica, Mount Bio, Holly Springs, North Mississippi Community Training. The Diaper Bank has been all over the Delta, all over the state. So please give a shout out to the Diaper Bank and Chalisa Presley. Just look at the North Mississippi Baptist. That's where we met Reverend Dwight Mosley, and he's nonstop. You talk about a motor running, and I know he's supposed to be on this call, but you can see the coverage that we've given to our food pantries, but you can see the faces of the people who are on the front line, older, Caucasians, dark skin, African Americans. It's, young people, they're all over the place. There's Jeremiah, he might be under 30. I didn't mean to play that, but so anyway, that just gives you an example. If you look at our YouTube channel, you can easily see how the impact the Feed Fund is making on our 11 county area. So that concludes my presentation about the Feed Fund, and we thank Delta Directions for everything you're helping us do.
Thank you, Tom and Keith. I think you all did a great job explaining the role of Community Foundation, the Feed Fund in Mississippi. I just let everyone know Tom and Keith will be giving information on possible grant monies that you can apply for later on. That will happen towards the end of this session. But just to give you a heads up, stick around to make sure you receive that information. And like I said, this is being recorded, so you'll have access to this information later on. Now, Tom and Keith just gave you a lot of information. We want to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions. And because there is a good number of you that join the session today, thank you for coming. We want to just give everyone the opportunity to ask the question. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a section that says Q&A. If you go there, you can type in a question for Tom and Keith, and also for Anna when she presents. But you can ask the question, and we'll get to it. Tom and Keith will be able to respond. And I'll start off with a question while you all come up with some questions. I want to know from Tom and Keith, does the community foundation work outside of the Delta region? Because as you were talking about the state of the art food pantry, and just hearing about some of the work that you've done in the Delta, I'm sure other organizations can learn from you all. So has there been any work outside of the Delta, or any trainings, or any possible collaborations outside of the Delta in other regions of Mississippi?
Oh, Terrence, yes. I mean, we've met with the United Nations World Food Program Council out of Washington, D.C. So, we're taking on the world. We're bringing the world as resources to us. I see Emma Scott smiling. I mean, Harvard and Boston, we're giving everyone the opportunity who has any resources. We've contacted Baylor for their resources in the area of food, hunger, and poverty. McLean poverty distribution out of Texas. I mean, we've worked with the Mid-South Food Bank, Mississippi Food Network, Extra Table. We've worked with any type of food provider that will bring food into our region. And we have 11 counties. And Stacy, if you'll go ahead and throw up those 11 counties in the chat box, Stacy, then we'll show you which counties we've worked in. But I don't know if that answers your. We've worked with Austin Avery in Memphis about, as Tom mentioned, the aquaponics project, trying to get that going. We've worked with Dorothy Grady in Shelby, Mississippi, who has a statewide, thank you for this is a good leading question, Terrence. You didn't know you asked a leading question. Dorothy Grady in Shelby with Farm to School Network. She is funding, thanks to the Maddox Foundation and the Kellogg Foundation, Dorothy is funding about 1,300 home gardens for children throughout the entire state in all 82 counties. So a big shout out to Dorothy, who should be on this call. And that was a $160,000 funding project that we helped make available by putting together Robin Hurdle and the Maddox Foundation and Jed Oppenheim with the Kellogg, thanks to our relationship with Dorothy, who was the 2017 Margaret Maddox Woman of the Year, honored by the Community Foundation. Does that answer your question, Terrence?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So we have a few questions in the Q&A box. Just a reminder, for questions, please type your questions in the Q&A section. I know I see Monica typed one in the chat box. I see it. I will get to it, but if you can, please put them in the Q&A section. Langston Moore had the first question, and they wanted to know, have you done any work or funded any college food pantries?
Yes, I retired from Delta State University, so I contacted Dr. Vicki Bingham, and we offered. I don't know if we made a direct grant to the School of Nursing at Delta State, but they do have a food pantry. But we will, and we are open to that, and we'll have more information about the CARES Act grants, which is available to colleges and universities for food.
And Dina Ray had a question. Have you done or doing any work or thought about doing any long-term work to provide grocery stores in food desert areas that are already in trouble before COVID-19?
I'll take a shot at that. That is a long-term problem, and we've been trying to wrestle with that for over a dozen years. It is really a tough one to figure out. We've had all kind of options like, all kind of options, some of them being mobile grocery stores, some of them being getting some sort of financial assistance to get places, because there are several, I mean, in the Delta, there's a lot of food desert in there. And so just having availability of food is very, very difficult. I know Keith has continued to work on that and gotten maybe a couple more leads, but it is a long-term project that will involve many, many people to get a solution.
Yeah, I think Dina might be referring to in Quitman County, there is not a single grocery store in Quitman County and Marks, Lambert area. So, that is a huge food desert in that area. So we tried to push as much of our feed fund grant. We tried to push as much money as we could to Quitman County just to take care of the citizens and children in Quitman County. But that is an enormous problem that it's bigger than what we can solve. But Dina, if you have any recommendations, you might be thinking about Jonestown in Coahoma County. So just, any way we can partner on that or any leads we can. But, this is just a drop. I mean, that's not even a drop in the bucket of what's needed to fund the food insecurity in our 11 counties. I mean, we all know that. So, any ideas, any recommendations anybody has of where the money is? I'm half Lebanese. I always start off with that. I'm half Lebanese, so I love money. That's the number one word that every little Lebanese child learns is Masadi. That's the first word, and that means money. So I'm all about finding the money to do good with it.
Thank you, Keith. Monica had a question. She put it in the chat box. I don't know if everyone saw it, but she's saying in Sunflower County, they're preparing over 1,000 meals under the USDA program. And it will end on September 4th. We see the need for the supper meals for children. Are there any resources out there that we can tap into?
I'm not certain, but it sounds like, and this goes to Linda Whittington's question as well about this new USDA ruling, and it sounds like that the schools would be able to provide the meals, but there's the issue of distribution, and that's a huge problem. And I think that that may be something that each nonprofit locally needs to work with their school district and their schools on to try to help figure that out. And if you need some assistance, come back to Keith and maybe there's some money that will be available, or maybe can help find some. Keith, you have any other ideas on that?
Well, that's the key word. I mean, Monica's been wonderful to work with, but those key words, tap into, that's what we've struggled with. How do you tap into the resources? I talked to a produce company, and they have put in a bid to deliver 14,000 boxes of produce a week. So that was my question to that produce company. And maybe our friends at the 2, 3, 4 major food providers in our region can give us guidance on that. But how does a nonprofit tap into and get on the list of being a delivery drop-off point? So Monica, if that's what you're talking about, we were able to help. I'll give you 2 examples. Rosedale Freedom Project, Jeremiah Smith and Rosedale was an after-school tutoring academic program. And then Sunflower Freedom Project in Sunflower, Mississippi was the same academic program. When the pandemic hit, we called and said, could you get into the food delivery business? Delta Hands for Hope and Shaw, same way. And so those 3 academic nonprofits converted themselves into food delivery, taking food door to door, and they were supplied by food from the 2 of the major food providers in our region. And so, Monica, if that's what you're talking about, we will do everything we can. I mean, Prairie Farms, milk, Care Now called an ice cream milk company, made a contact there, and that company started delivering once a week ice cream and milk to the children. So, that's what we're still struggling with. How do we tap in, and how do we help our grassroots nonprofits tap directly into those resources?
Okay, we have time for about 2 brief questions. I see Ernest Dixon posted one. He says he's incorporated in Mississippi and Tennessee, but originally he worked in South Haven for 3 years. But his physical location is in Memphis. Does he have to be physically located in Mississippi to participate in the feed fund or the grant?
Yeah, Tom, you got to, can we grant out of state if they're serving our counties, Tom? I'm fairly new at that. So, Tom.
I think we can out of the money that's owned by the Community Foundation, but in the money that comes to us, like from the CARES Act, we would only be able to distribute that to folks in Mississippi.
Last question from Mary Mary said Hernando Meals on Wheels received a grant from the Community Foundation previously, and their focus area is food security for citizens. Do they need to be associated with the food pantry to apply for the grant?
Let's see. The one that's coming up that we'll be talking about later, it's a broad definition of food pantry, and Hernando Meals on Wheels would definitely fit it. Just to give you a preview, it's a food pantry is defined as an organization that distributes food to low-income and unemployed individuals and households to relieve situations of emergency and distress. So even though they don't really call themselves a food pantry, for purposes of the grant we'll be talking about, they will be a food pantry.
But I think now it's a good time to move into our formal presentation on the Feed Fund interviews. Anna Kleiner will be giving this presentation, and to give you a brief background on her, she's an affiliate of the Center for Population Studies at the University of Mississippi. She's a consultant for the community-based research and education, and before being affiliated with CPS, she worked as a professor at Southeastern Louisiana University, and she has extensive experience working with organizations around disaster, and her work around these feed funding interviews will actually help each of you and help us figure out the needs for each community in the Delta.
Okay, thank you, Terrence. Okay. Yes, I'm very happy to be involved in this particular project, and I think you'll find that a lot of the content I discuss in this presentation is directly related to what we've already been discussing today. So these have been the project partners involved overall in the Feed Fund initiative. Many of them are familiar to you. And the foundation launched the Feed Fund thanks to the matching grant from Maddox that's been mentioned already, to provide emergency funding for area food pantries, especially the ones located in food insecure rural areas. So the project was designed to explore changes in communities across 11 counties of Northwest Mississippi to help the foundations identify priorities for their funding, to address challenges and build upon assets. Now, one of the original plans was to have community-based meetings, but due to the pandemic, it evolved into a different approach, and that was the phone interviews. The pictures on this particular page, I've borrowed from the Community Foundation's Facebook page. They've been posting many different pictures about the investments they've been making with particular organizations. So the research methods are here, and I made the interview phone calls in May and June of this year, and the respondents for the 33 completed interviews out of 60 organizations contacted came from the list of food pantries and similar organizations in the 11 county region, and that list was provided by the Community Foundation and the Center for Population Studies, for which I'm an affiliate. These particular interviews included talking with people from 9 out of the 11. I was able to contact several people out of 9 out of the 11 counties. So for those who agreed, the interviews were audio recorded and transcribed. The notes in the transcripts were analyzed for the main themes presented here. The the Mississippi map to the right was created by our colleague Jamiko, University of Mississippi, and it shows the extent of the Feed Fund initiative across the state of Mississippi. So the questionnaires the questionnaire used for these phone interviews covered 5 thematic areas, and the respondents talked about their primary roles of their organizations before the pandemic and throughout the pandemic, because some of those roles definitely had to change. They discussed organizational and community challenges and various concerns related to the pandemic. They were asked to talk about any pandemic awareness activities that they were involved with at the community level. They discussed resources and partnerships in trying to respond to the pandemic. So some of these resource questions looked at what kind of resources do they have? What do they have plenty of? But then what kind of resources, even what kind of partnerships have been scarce during the pandemic, which has been posing some barriers to them serving the people that they really want to reach. And then we talked about the potential solutions to barriers faced during the pandemic. So the first question, primary roles of the organizations. Most organizations, if not all, suspended regular programming to adhere to safety and social distancing guidelines with an effort to focus on food distribution. A lot of this had to do with them being forced to shut down their facilities, to not allow the public into their buildings, for example, to be involved in other activities that they would normally be involved with. So some of the normal scope of services that they discussed, of course, was emergency food assistance and long-term efforts to address food insecurity. So that particular purpose definitely continued. And there were actually a few food pantries that were new in food distribution as a result of the pandemic responding to the people's needs. Several organizations were involved already in workforce development, like computer training, resume writing assistance, helping people prepare for interviews. Those kinds of services had to be shut down. There's also some organizations that have provided supplemental education for youth, such as mentoring, after school tutoring. That too had to cease temporarily. Several organizations customarily have provided assistance to senior citizens. A few have provided housing assistance, such as rental assistance, finding housing units, operating some housing units, paying for rent, and paying for utilities. Others have been involved in health and nutrition training, acquisition of prescription medication, clothing, providing gas for people. And then some organizations have been involved in more specialized care, such as that focused on women's wellness, providing diapers and related supplies for children. And as one respondent emphasized in the middle of this pandemic, the food issue is paramount, even though the other activities like education are certainly important. If people don't listen, people don't listen if they are hungry. That was the quote. People don't listen if they are hungry. So the food issue is primary. The respondents discussed many challenges, many concerns related to their experiences with the pandemic. As I've mentioned, they've had to close their facilities to the public, suspend normal programs, and there's been a concern expressed that this presents a loss of personal assistance, a loss of a holistic approach to helping people when they can't fulfill their other roles that they're used to and have to focus solely on food. So some of them were concerned about not being able to meet other needs of people. Services such as food distribution have been limited to curbside pickup and off-site deliveries. So many of them had to revert to that type of distribution. But as one person was happy to discuss, they were seeing pure joy and happiness of people on their faces when they received this food. And that really made the experience meaningful to these volunteers. But while we're talking about so much reliance on volunteers, this pandemic has posed barriers to that. There have been too few volunteers to serve or deliver food due to perceived health risks. Many volunteers are elderly, and they've felt the need to kind of refrain from that kind of public exposure. So some of them have not been able to help out. And this is one person expressed a lack of human capital. So that's been kind of a perceived barrier. Limited transportation in the region has affected people's access to food pantries and supplies. Closing of schools, as we've already heard, has really limited access to food, academic training, educational supplies. And it's hard for students to get some of these educational supplies when they're at home, when they can't just go to a local store and pick them up. One of the huge pieces in all the discussion about barriers has been the limited access to internet service and computers. Not everyone has that kind of access because they're, number one, they can't be in some of these buildings, and number two, they can't access the programs, or they're not in school where they can have that kind of service. So that's been a barrier. Job losses, furloughs have increased financial and food insecurity. A few of the organizations have provided mental health services, but they've had to be suspended. And this increases the pressure on people from the pandemic's effects. So some of those needs are going unmet. And as we've all experienced at one time or another, the shortage of sanitizing solutions, paper products, masks, that has persisted. And then there's been the scarcity of some foods, produce and meat, for example, accompanied by higher food prices. So this list of concerns has really been widespread. A lot of these came up in the interviews time after time. And as one person, if not more, emphasized, the conditions in the Delta are already poor. Now with the pandemic, there's no way out for some of these people. We explored the pandemic awareness activities with which they've been involved. They've all, when passing out the food, has been consistent, and other items have been consistently using masks, gloves, sanitizers. There's been a true consciousness about the safety of themselves, but also serving the public. So that they have been used widespread. But they haven't had time, really time or resources to do any kind of awareness activities at the community level. One of the things they have been able to engage in some cases has been being able to work with local media outlets on making public service announcements for donations, advertising when they're distributing food. So they've relied a lot on those kinds of outlets for assistance to get the word out. A few organizations have been able to distribute their brochures on health and other issues to people as they drive up to get food. And some of them have even passed out their regular information, which may relate to opioid risks and other challenges faced by their particular population they're serving. There are some organizations out there promoting participation in the 2020 census, and that's what we like to hear because they are trying to get people to understand that getting counted and getting the Delta adequately represented in a census can result in that area realizing more resources in the future. So they wanted to stress the importance of that. The respondents talked a lot about resources and partnerships in the response. What have been some assets that they've valued all along the way? What kind of resources, maybe partnerships, have been not so plentiful? There's a very high level of value placed on volunteers. Most respondents touted the dedication, the hours, everything that comes from the volunteers. And of course, the concerns with limited number of volunteers. They've often talked about support from churches, other food pantries, organizations of various types, the value of strong networks. As one respondent discussed and said, we are always in conversation, always talking to people, reaching out to try to serve people the best way we can, to broaden our scope of effectiveness. Many of them were very appreciative of the Maddox Foundation and the Community Foundation for their grants and other support that they've provided. So that came up a lot. They express appreciation about the food networks, the one in Jackson, the one in Memphis, and their response to increased demand. Some organizations that have access have been able to train and network and share information on the internet, attending webinars, Zoom conferences, even like this one. So that's helped them work their way through the pandemic and some of the challenges. I mentioned earlier local media assisting with the sharing of information. Some organizations depend a lot on Facebook emails, other ways of reaching out to people and to the public to ask for help, but also to kind of document what their successes have been so far. They talked a lot about value of relationships with retailers and grocery distributors like we have today already, and what they've been able to help people with. But there's also a need for larger food distribution sites and more storage and equipment for perishable foods. Now, what we mean by larger food distribution sites is that some of these operations are small. They work out of a small building space using a very small parking lot at some location. And when we get the large trucks coming in with the food and they get the people lined up in cars to try to get the food, there's no space on the parking lots. They need more physical space, and some have actually been looking for alternative distribution sites to try to meet those needs. So those are some real physical challenges that they're managing. A few people talked about needing to somehow divide smaller packages of donated meats for distribution. If we get a large package from a retailer that's 10 to 20 pounds of chicken or beef, due to food regulations, the food pantries cannot separate those out for individual distribution. So they'd like to somehow be able to get some of those donations in smaller packages. So that is actually a barrier. You may think it's not, but it is because of some of the regulations. And then people need more transportation options for the people seeking services. So barriers and scarce resources, and I've alluded to some of these already. The resources in short supply, at least in May and June, were the disinfectants, paper products, some types of food, and of course, the food affordability in the stores has really skyrocketed in some cases. I mean, the prices have. There's been limited strategies for distributing extra food, avoiding waste. So some people have received quite a bit of food or perishable items, for example, and if they can't give it all out and they need to get it out in the next 5 to 7 days, they don't know what to do with it. So sometimes there's excess and they need to have people explore alternative outlets that maybe they can share their extra food with. There's been limited access to training, tools, and other inputs for home gardening. That issue came up early on. And of course, the limited technological access and in some cases, rural infrastructure in general. Someone talked about people's driveways in rural areas that are gravel driveways and very deteriorated, and the people don't have enough resources to build their new, a new driveway into their home, has actually curtailed some delivery of food to people's homes because of the physical infrastructure being problematic. The shortage of reliable transportation came up often. Of course, the too few volunteers. So people are trying to get creative about how to reach other volunteer groups that might be ready to help. There's been concern expressed about how are people going to pay rent and utilities when those relief programs have concluded. Of course, limited school programs and meals for students, the suspension of the mental health assistance, and what kind of risk that poses to people, and then the disruption of employment through layoffs and the fewer opportunities there. So many different solutions were discussed. I tried to kind of group them into some of the more dominant ones, but in the broader report, it gets in more detail. Expand internet access and create hotspots for Wi-Fi. So this came up several times, and one person talked about possibly having school buses equipped with Wi-Fi be able to move around a community and let students and others pick up the Wi-Fi for particular periods of time. I did hear that the Pearl School District is one district in the state of Mississippi that does this, and it might be something to explore to try to address that issue. Maybe there's some businesses and other organizations that might help to expand their Wi-Fi to the outside of their buildings. So people who can't go into some of these facilities to do their work might have to do it outside, but might be able to access it better out there. There are a few people that talked about providing more culturally and age appropriate meal plans for adults, for kids that are easy to prepare. There's nothing wrong with a lot of the commodity bulk items that are passed out, but sometimes it will be more helpful if a package of food would kind of have the elements of a more normal meal. It would help some people kind of figure out how they can prepare a particular meal. The taste of children might be different from adults. So that's what this relates to, some meal options, contents of these meal packages. The issue of the securing more equipment and space to accommodate bulk storage came up in a number of cases, and developing strategies for just distributing extra food, minimizing waste. So we've seen some overlap in some of the discussions and the themes here. And then a few people talked about maybe developing continuous farmers markets more throughout the year, since there's a couple different growing seasons in Mississippi, maybe expanding some online purchasing options for fresh food, just looking at some other means beyond just beyond the emergency food distribution. So some general recommendations coming out of this was the need to build up existing networks, form the working groups, and we asked people about their interest in participating in working groups, and just about everyone said, yes, as time allows, I would like to participate in a working group somehow in my county and the region. So they are definitely interested. They want to strengthen their partnerships to increase the visibility of people's needs and the visibility of what their organization is doing, and work together with as many different people as possible to address these issues we've discussed and then develop future goals. Also, different ways to expand volunteerism on the front lines through various partnerships, communication strategies to get the word out, the need for volunteers. And of course, the Wi-Fi issue and computer access issue for the broader public use. And because some of these buildings have had to shut down, people can't come in and use the computers. They may not have them at their disposal. Libraries have shut down in many cases. So if there's some way to get some computer access beyond just the Wi-Fi, the equipment would be helpful. And then research and establish alternative food purchasing options. So a concluding thought that really isn't a new thought. It's something many of us have been exploring, working on for decades. As with other disasters, the pandemic has revealed long existing social and economic inequalities. Nonetheless, there is also a history of community action in the region. Investment in long-term solutions can help to raise the standards of the region to levels that can more successfully absorb the effects of crisis events and ongoing processes of social change. So that concludes the presentation. I'm going to try to get down here. Okay. Okay, here I'm back.
Thank you, Anna.
Okay.
That was some very valuable information. I hope everyone was listening closely. We do, like with Tom and Keith, we have another Q&A section. So if you have some questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I see some people had already put some things in there. Lois Harrison, she was saying that food distributions increase, but she has a lack of access to volunteers, and companies are informing that their employees can't volunteer to help with distribution, and they can't take anyone under 18. And she didn't pose a question, but what I'm getting from it, she wants to know what things can they do to help recruit people to help distribute this food.
I guess there's multiple strategies, and you just have to see what kind of access, what kind of resources they may have. I mean, just word of mouth, using Facebook in an immediate area, something like that may not be enough. Maybe through some other social service agencies. There are some that may have access to other volunteer pools, and maybe some of their volunteers have not been needed as much because of their facilities shutting down. I don't know. Does anybody else have any ideas? It's always a challenge, definitely. Even when there's not a pandemic, there's shortages of volunteers in a lot of ways. The churches, many of the churches couldn't meet. So they may normally have been able to garner some support and some donations possibly from the church congregations. And sometimes that's waned too because of the pandemic.
Hey, Terrence, let me mention the Maddox Foundation Volunteer Center. I mean, that's our #1 effort. That's Brenda Smith and Kara Delaney. And I think that's would help out in this discussion, but they're both online, and they'll enter their contact information for the Maddox Foundation Volunteer Center. That is their mission, is to help corral volunteers, which is a huge, enormous challenge with these food pantries, because as I said earlier, these people are, most of them, when I say elderly, I'm 58, so I mean, they're over 50, and working day and night in the heat, working in the tornadoes. I mean, look at the videos that I did on the YouTube, that we did on the YouTube. You'll see actual thunderstorm that they're working in these thunderstorms, and volunteerism is a major need that we have, but our Maddox Volunteer Center, they are positioned to support in that area.
Okay, thank you all. Another question from Kelly. Do the food pantries know what food is being delivered beforehand? Does anybody want to take that one?
Terrence, ask that question again.
Do the food pantries, do they know what food is being delivered before it's delivered to the community? I guess they want to know what's in the boxes, what kind of food is it. They might be trying to figure out if it's organic, whether any pesticides were used on it, or just what food is being delivered. I know Anna brought up some meal plans, and they had struggles with putting those together, and that might be something that they could ask about, what comes in the meal plans, or what food is being delivered to the community. Do they know before it's delivered?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm new at this, so I mean, there are people on this call who could answer that professionally, but from my experience, food pantries pre-pandemic were able to go online and order their food from the Mid-South Food Bank, Mississippi Food Network, Extra Table, and then other providers, and know exactly what they're getting. But if you went online to order it towards the end of the month, you might not be able to get eggs or milk or bacon. I know Helping Hands in Cleveland, who I've gotten close to, Reverend Young, he would drive to Indianola, Greenville, if he heard there was a deal on eggs or milk, and to use his money wisely. But I know the produce companies that are delivering, it's a box of fresh produce and vegetables. If you want to see what is being delivered, you can go, again, I'll point you to our YouTube channel, and I've videoed boxes and what's inside the contents. But I think for the most part, they do know. Now, USDA food deliveries, somebody from Mid-South or Mississippi Food Bank, if you're on, put that in the chat box and answer about the USDA food deliveries and whether the food pantries know exactly what they're getting.
Okay. All right, we have another question from Langston. Would the volunteers be able to or be interested in gleaning food from fields? And I'm assuming that's the fields in the Delta.
I think the same exists in terms of volunteers and being able to get physical bodies, right? Like we have a hard time. I was just had a conversation with one of our students who's helping the food pantry in Quitman County, and they have a hard time getting folks to unload the truck. So I think, they're open to gleaned food, but the problem really is in the number of bodies they have available to go do those things. And when I'm thinking of the Quitman County Food Pantry in particular, the folks who are in charge of, running and organizing the food pantry often have a set of disabilities that would make that really difficult, in the same way that it makes it difficult for them to unload the truck. So yes, I think they're open to having that food, but I think it's just getting people out to be able to do the work.
Does anybody have any more questions? I know I could pose a question. I actually listening to Anna present, I thought of one. She quoted someone during the interview saying how the Delta already had its problems before COVID, and now this pandemic is there. It feels as though there's no way out. So my question would be, do you know of any state action that is specific to the Delta to help accommodate its needs? Because we know the Delta is much different from other regions in Mississippi. Has the state taken any special action to address the needs of the Delta?
And who did you direct that to?
I was asking Anna, but if anybody knows, they can.
Good, because I didn't want to get political. So Anna, you take that one, Anna. Thank you.
I don't know offhand, except maybe through some of the farm to school programs, which are trying to establish more community garden opportunities, maybe more gardens at people's homes as a result of the pandemic, bringing the gardens to them since they can't have them at the schools as readily right now. But I don't know of any others offhand. I was going to recommend maybe if some organizations, some pantries, somebody could maybe reach out to some of the farmer co-ops in the Delta, because there are some with local producers that maybe that, and they may already have gotten some donations from producers like that, but maybe that might be an opportunity to get some more fresh produce from the region.
Yeah, we know that Mike Wagner, he's a board member of the Community Foundation. He has a rice farm in Tallahatchie County. He is donating. Another board member works for a catfish company, and he has offered to donate. So, I mean, that's another opportunity for us. We don't know all the players, but we're doing everything we can to get to know anybody who has access to food. So that's a great recommendation. So, I mean, with 100 people on the call, we ought to be able to come up with a few more resources to get food into our region.
Well, we are running a bit on time. We want to just be cognizant of that. Thank you to the presenters. As of right now, we do have an interactive session that we want to take part in. We're going to introduce some polling questions to you all, so you can have a chance to interact with us. At this moment, I'll turn it over to John and Lynn to introduce those questions.
All right, thank you, Terrence, and thank you everyone for participating. I'm John Green. I'm with the University of Mississippi Center for Population Studies and work with the Delta Directions Consortium that's been discussed today. And as Anna just presented, really kind of detailed, rich findings from these interviews that she did with many of you, and we're thankful for that. But now we want to get input from the larger group. And so a way to do that with such a large group is we just have some what we call polling questions that we're going to ask you. Some of you may have done this in other webinars. Lynn, who's also with the center, is going to post some questions, and we're going to do them one by one, give you a few seconds to respond, and then she'll show the results. And we're capturing those results so that we can build them back into feed fund planning. As you know, as the Community Foundation is working with all of its partners to raise more funds, to make grants, to do the kinds of education and outreach needed for this type of work. And so your input will be very helpful, and also helps us to understand what will be some of the needs that you might be pursuing if you're going to be pursuing this grant opportunity that Keith and Tom will be talking about. So Lynn, you want to post the first question? So again, if you can take a moment to respond to the questions that Lynn poses, and then she'll give you a little bit of time to respond, and then she'll post the results. Okay, Lynn, you want to share the results from the first question?
Yeah, I'll hold off another 10 seconds for a few more people to answer. All right. And sharing the results now.
All right, thank you. So you can see, for those of you who voted, what were some of the key things that were brought up, and we developed these themes as an outcome of some of the findings from the interviews. Okay, Lynn, you want to present the next one?
Sure will. Okay, and I'll end polling now, and I'll share the results.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So you see some of the priority areas that I think is very, very helpful, you know, for everyone to know, but also as we're thinking about the types of investments that are needed for this, to support this kind of work. I think it's very useful. Lynn, is there one more?
There are two more, but these last
Two
two
more.
are relatively small questions. They're relatively short, so let me launch 3. Okay. So these are the polls. And then this one will be the last poll. in the last few seconds, and I'll end the poll. And share those results.
Well, thanks to everybody for participating. I hope as you've seen your fellow participants' responses that it's been informative for, you know, how your experience might compare with others. And again, we're capturing this information. We'll be able to use it with the Community Foundation for, you know, kind of prioritizing grant making and that sort of thing, as well as conveying to other foundations and partners, et cetera, what's needed in the region. So thanks, Lynn. And Terrence, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, John. And can't stress enough how much the information they're receiving from you all is going to be used in the future by Delta Directions, Community Foundation, other partners. As we get to the latter stages of this session, I want to just make sure everyone knows about this Hunger Summit. We are going to try to do, or we are going to do a session each month. It's going to be the first Thursday of each month going forward. That makes our next session going to be happening October 1st. And the additional sessions, they're going to focus on other policy issues, programming issues. Members of our network from like HLS, Harvard Law School, they're going to be presenting on certain issues, and other partners. So we just want to make sure everyone comes back and to our next session and get this invaluable information that we're providing. And as of right now, we're going to turn it to Keith and Tom to talk about the grant application process. I know some people were looking forward to this information, and now it's here. Again, we're going to provide this information at a later date because it is being recorded. But Tom and Keith, please talk about the grant application.
Okay, thank you, Terrence. And I mean, it's all about the money to make things happen. And those polling questions, Lynn, which is very, very powerful. I mean, simple and very powerful. And to me, it validates what we've done as a staff at the Community Foundation through our feed fund. Because through this amount of money, we've been able to buy freezers, refrigerators, and pallet jacks, as I said, but we're also even helping expand the physical space of certain food pantries, and that would just seem to be a huge need. So about a month and a half ago, we were notified by the House of Representatives that House Bill 1782 had passed, and it allocated $8 million, a total of $8 million for the 7 community foundations to divide up to use for two purposes. One was for food pantry expenses for food, and second, for nonprofits for COVID-19 expenses. So our share, the Community Foundation of Northwest Mississippi, our share of that $8 million is $1.2 million that we will have to grant to nonprofits and to food pantries, churches, colleges, schools, and any tax-exempt entity. And the purpose is to reimburse for expenses incurred between March 1st and December 31st for COVID-19. All right, and I hope I'm clear about this. We'll put it in writing to you as guidelines are firmed up with the Mississippi Development Authority. You will be the first to receive the guidelines. So it's for 2 areas. The Community Foundation will have $600,000 to donate to food pantries for expenses and to nonprofits for expenses. And each individual grant will be up to $4,000 each grant. So a food pantry is eligible for a grant, and if they had spent money for COVID-19 expenses, they are eligible for a second $4,000 grant for a total of $8,000. So that's the max grant. All right, so there are 18 categories of allowable grants. So I don't think you want me to read all 18, but it's anything to do with COVID relief. social distancing, PPE purchase, COVID screening, the technology of working from home, vulnerable populations, homelessness. I don't know if Reverend McGee from Indianola is on the call, but they have been providing shelter for the homeless during this time. You can be reimbursed for those expenditures. So if that's enough of the examples, a mortgage, interest, rent, payroll, utilities are reimbursable. So you will be the first to hear of those 18 categories as soon as MDA sends the community foundations the guidelines, which we hope to receive by Friday. So how do you qualify? 2 qualifications, simple. You must be registered at the Secretary of State's office, or you must be incorporated as a nonprofit. So those are the 2 qualifications. And then Tom will go back and fill in where I'm missing. So Tom, just be prepared where things I'm missing, Tom will fill in. So the application date, tentatively, we will launch an online grants portal on September 15th, on or just soon after September 15th. So if you're listening to the call, an online grants portal will be posted on our Community Foundation website, cfnm.org. And you will upload the grant application, which is a very simple grant application, name, address, EIN number, proof of receipts. So we're trying to keep it all community foundations in the state of Mississippi. There was somebody from Laurel, Lamar County, asking about, will we make a grant to Lamar County? The answer is no, but you can call your local community foundation. We've been assigned counties. We have been assigned, in addition to our 11 counties, we've been assigned 3 additional counties. And Stacy, I think Stacy Trout will post the 14 counties we've been assigned into the chat box. So what documents do you need? Receipts. Any receipts that you have kept from March 1 until today, collect those receipts. The grant application will ask you to itemize those receipts and send copies to us. Purchase orders. If you have a purchase order, we have been told that we can accept a purchase order and reimburse just based on a purchase order. I'll give you an example. A food pantry we work with needed a new storage shed, 20 by 20 storage shed. It just happened to cost $3,800. So we have reviewed, just to try to test the system, we have reviewed that receipt, and we feel like they are eligible for the CARES Act reimbursement up to $4,000 just based on that one receipt. Right, so we have 14 counties. The portal will go live, and the Maddox Volunteer Center will send you a notification. Everyone who's on this call, I see 3 of them dropped off. Too bad for them, but they sorry about that, but they will receive the call, the email from the Maddox Volunteer Center. So expect to get an email from bsmith@cfnm.org, and you will be first to know as soon as the portal goes live. But before the portal goes live, you will be the first to know the confirmed guidelines from MDA. That's the benefit, Terrence, that we have promised the participants, that they will be first to know. All right, what can you do in the interim? And I'm setting myself up for a lot of phone calls and a lot of conversations, but it's worth it. My phone number is 662-719-1732. That's my cell phone. I live on it. So you can call me if you have questions about receipts that you have collected, and we'll just walk through and analyze. And we'll start doing that immediately, because we want our nonprofits in our areas to jump on this opportunity to receive up to $4,000 for food, $4,000 as a nonprofit for reimbursement. So I'll be glad to talk to you individually and to review documents. So Tom, did I leave anything out that's important for them to know?
I think in terms of, this is not really a competitive grant. It's really a first come, first served. that if you meet the guidelines, you will get the grant to reimburse you for your expenses. And so until the money runs out, that's the only limitation. So it's really not competitive. As Keith says, it will be a very simple application process. And I just want to reiterate, because there's so many diverse groups on here, that although it's called the food pantry in the legislation, it's really just an organization that is distributing food to low income and unemployed individuals and not charging them anything for it. So if you're distributing food and not charging people for it, and you are an organization, then you are eligible for this grant. So it's a pretty broad definition. That'd be the only thing I would add, Keith. You did a good job. And we hope to get lots of applications and give away all the money quickly.
Thank you, Tom. I think I did mention a couple of key, number 12 qualification. Expenses to facilitate distance learning, including technological improvements in connection with closings to enable compliance with COVID precautions. So I know Chris Campos asked about distance learning in the chat. So, I think all of us have experienced expenses in that distance learning, but we will work with you to do everything possible to help you get qualified for these grants. So Terrence, if that's enough information about the CARES Act, I don't know if you wanted to take any questions now, but they can call me directly.
Before we go into our last topic, I see there was a question in the Q&A box. Chelsea and Ben kind of had the same question. They just wanted to know, what's the months, like what's the range of months that you can be reimbursed for the grant money? And I think you said starting in March 1st.
Expenses starting March 1st. Now the law as written says through December 30th, but I guarantee we will give that money out before December 30th. So March 1st, look at your receipts back to March 1st and compile those.
And what's the last date so they can put those receipts together? Is it after today or before today?
No, it's after today. It goes through March. The law says through March 30th, but I guarantee we will have given the money out by, December 30th.
Okay.
Sorry, March 1st to December 30th is what the law says. But we will have, I'm sure we will have given the money out before December 30th. So that's why we want our nonprofits to get theirs in as soon as that grant portal goes live. I'd like for us to have just about every participant on here who has qualified to have submitted.
Okay. And Langston wanted to know, do you have to be located in the 14 counties or just have served in those counties?
Yeah, Langston, that's a good question, which we will get clarified. But as far as I believe the law is written, I think, Tom, you stated that earlier, you have to be in one of those 14 counties. But Langston, you call me directly and we'll try to figure something out. If you are serving our counties, we want to do everything we can within the law. And this is a law. This is not any discretion that the Community Foundation has. This is federal money. We don't normally deal with federal money, so we don't have a lot of latitude, and we will be very careful in how we make our decisions. But our decisions will all be to the benefit of the nonprofits.
And I'll make this our last question before going into our last topic. Dina wants to know, are only food distributors qualified? I think you all could probably answer that pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, the law says churches, schools, colleges, tax exempt organizations. So I'm thinking, if that's the Boy Scouts, the animal shelters, it's anybody that is considered a nonprofit, 501c3. But we will work with you, and that is part of the application. The questions clarifying what type of entity is applying, and so we will work with you to make sure you meet the guidelines. So that answers Dina's questions. So spread this around. If you're involved in your own churches, other social service organizations, anybody that's been trying to especially take care of COVID-19 relief efforts, please share this opportunity with the other nonprofits that you work with or volunteer with outside of your own work.
Absolutely. Please share. We want to try to get this money out to anybody that needs it. And I also think this is a perfect segue into our most pressing topic, because this CARES Act funding, the way it's distributed, they take the information that they receive from the census. And as some of you know, that the census is coming up, and the deadline to respond to the census is at the end of this month. Actually, they moved it up. Instead of it being at the end of October, now it's at the end of September. So Dr. John Green is going to give you some information on what the Center for Population Studies has been doing statewide regarding census promotion. And I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Terrence. And as Terrence mentioned, our next meeting for this group with the Feed Fund, we'll be doing another webinar on October 1st. So we wanted to share this information since the census will be completed by the time of our next meeting. So I'm just going to take a couple minutes. We want to make sure we wrap up right on time. So just to emphasize a couple of points related to the census and the work that you all do and that we've been discussing today. Because in addition to apportionment for state representation in federal government, which is why the census is conducted and is constitutionally mandated, is related to apportionment, data are also used for redistricting and those kinds of purposes. But as it relates to what brings us together today, we want everybody to understand that census data, and that includes both the decennial census, which we're talking about with the 2020 census, and all of the other Census Bureau products are used for other purposes. And this includes determining eligibility for funding and allocating funding related to government programs. I'm going to specifically focus on that, but I do want to mention that most government agencies at the state and federal level, we're talking here about the federal, as well as most of your foundations, your philanthropic foundations, require the use of census data in some form or fashion to demonstrate number of people in an area and to demonstrate need and that sort of thing. So it has a great impact. If we look at federal funds that are spent using information from the decennial census and from these other census products, we've estimated, using data from the Census Bureau, as well as from George Washington University and our Mississippi Complete Count Committee, working with the focus group, approximately $5,000 per person per year in federal dollars are allocated in Mississippi on the basis of census data. So there's a great deal at stake in terms of a lot of the programs that brings us together. I've listed a few of them here: food and nutrition. You can think about all of your programs like SNAP and WIC as being impacted by this, as well as your school lunch and school breakfast programs. All kinds of healthcare funding, housing funding from rural development to housing and urban development, and even the CARES Act funding that we've discussed today. I went through the CARES Act, and the word population is used over 20 times within the CARES Act. And an interesting thing is there's one entry that defines the population. And the definition in the CARES Act for the population is the latest population numbers from the US Census Bureau, right? And so that's how these dollars are allocated in Mississippi as well as to the rest of the country. So as of September 1st, Mississippi's self-participation rate was at 59%. So that's people who went online or called via telephone or sent in a paper questionnaire. With the non-response follow-up, meaning the enumerators that are going out there door to door now and trying to get people to complete, it takes us to almost 76%. But of course, this is too low. This is supposed to represent a full accounting of our population. And we in particular want the self-response rate to be as high as possible. Our Center for Population Studies we house a state data center for Mississippi, and we work with the Complete Count Committee at the state level and with the Census Bureau, trying to do outreach, promotion, education about the census, along with a wide variety of other organizations at the state level, as well as local Complete Count committees. So here's a few things that you can do. And I want to acknowledge, as Anna shared, and we know that many of you have already been involved with census promotion efforts, have distributed materials, and we want to emphasize that whatever can be done to continue that is worthwhile. So obviously for people to self-respond to the census, to promote it within your families and your organizations, really pushing people to either complete online or via telephone. Folks can call this number that's listed here, 844-330-2020, and can complete the census online, on telephone or online at the web address. Also, the Census Bureau really needs help promoting that they're out in the field now and that it's legitimate for the non-response follow-up. And so they're quote unquote promoting the answer the knock to really get the word out that the Census Bureaus are going to be in the communities, going door to door to these non-respondents. And if they don't have to keep going back to people's houses, it makes it much more efficient. And then finally, to share 2020 census materials through your organization and at your events, including if you have events where you are providing food. And I talked yesterday to one of our contacts with the Census Bureau Partnership Specialist Program, Kyra Roby, and she said it was fine for anybody on this call, on this meeting, who wants to contact her. If you're in need of materials related to census promotion and you're doing an event, within the next few weeks, and that also for some events they have people who can go and help do enumeration, help people to be able to participate with the census on site. And so some places around the state have been doing that. So if you have specific ideas, questions that you want, you can take me out as the middleman and you can contact Kyra directly so that we can get as full participation as possible. So we just want to really emphasize that. And of course, as I mentioned, you can feel free to contact Kyra directly. If you have other ideas and you want to share them with those of us involved with the Feed Fund, we're happy to help. But we know that time is passing quickly, and so that's why Kyra said feel free to contact her directly. So we can't overestimate the importance of the census and getting as complete a count as possible for this type of great work that you all are doing, and knowing that it's going to take time to both recover and redevelop after the pandemic, and then as the Community Foundation has emphasized, to help build state-of-the-art services in our communities. We don't want to just look at where we are now, but what we want to be for the future. And these census numbers are going to be with us for the next 10 years. And so we need them as accurate as possible. So thanks a lot, Terrence.
No, thank you, John. That was important. People need to know about it. If you haven't, please submit your responses to the census. It would be a shame if Mississippi missed out on this great amount of money simply because some people didn't respond to the census. So please take some time out, help promote it, and get people to respond and get that response rate up for Mississippi. And we are at the end of our session today. As we conclude, I want to just thank the panelists for taking the time out to present today, and also to the participants who came out today. We had a good number of people register and actually attend this session. So we want to thank you all for coming out, responding, and letting us get to know you just a bit. 2 dates we want you to be aware of. The first date is the grant portal that will be open on the Community Foundation's website. It's opening up on September 15th. September 15th, please put that in your calendars. Make sure you get that application in because we want to try to get rid of this money before the time runs out. And the next date will be for our next session for the Hunger Summit, which is October 1st. And then you'll learn more information on some of the things that we've been working on since the pandemic took place, since it started. But again, thank you all for coming out, and I look forward to hearing from everybody again.